Hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce you today, Tiffany Castano. That spicy last name. I hope I didn't mess it up. It's a beautiful name. She actually is in the HR realm, and I would like if you'd please introduce us to everyone. Thank you.
Sure. So as Brittany so lovely introduced me with a little spice, I'm a little spicy myself. So I'm Tiffany Castano. I am CEO of Zephyr, which is cultivating the evolution of professional HR. We're going to get into this topic. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but we support small business, medium business, startups, and nonprofits with building their infrastructure, systems, programs, policies, and procedures, and helping them build strong cultures. That's why I'm here today.
See, and we're all about the cultures, and I love it. I've been following you for a while on LinkedIn, and I've loved all your stuff, and I appreciate your support on my stuff as well. It's always been, makes me feel warm and sad, so thank you.
It's good stuff.
Thank you. And so I've noticed, I did that poll, and it was a big controversial, and a lot of people feel some type of way, if you will. And so today, LinkedIn, we're here to talk about that because the poll, long story short, was, do you feel like HR has your best interest? And unfortunately, there was a high percentage of about 260 people that said they didn't feel that HR had their best interest. And I know that seemed a bit trolling, but there was a reason that I asked that question because I know a lot of people feel that way, but I want HR to be able, because there's a lot of good HR people, there's bad apples in every career field, but I want HR to have the opportunity to talk about, their side of things. So, one of my first questions I wanted to ask Tiffany was, what were your initial thoughts about that poll and all the comments?
If my face was an emoji, right?
Right.
Whoa, that got deep. It got really deep, and it stung. It really stung because I said that I talk about the name of my company, and it's because I really do want to cultivate that evolution. I want to defeat those stereotypes that are out there because we're not all bad people. Sometimes people have had bad experiences, and so that's how we got there. But there's some truth in there, right? If 81% of that 260 feels like that, there's a reason why. And so that's our job as HR to discover. That's leadership's job. You and I talk about culture all the time because we are so serious about it. And it stung. As an HR person, I wanted to know more. I wanted to know why. I wanted to hear about their experiences because there are stories behind those. So it stung, and I'm glad you allowed this opportunity today so we could talk about it from maybe a different perspective because it did get deep in those comments.
Yes, it was spicy. I honestly wasn't that ready for. I knew it was gonna upset, and it upset people from both sides. People almost had like a bit of PTSD from such bad experiences that they had with HR, and then the HR people were like, not having it at all. Because I kind of felt I was attacking them, but clearly that was not the case. But I think some HR people too, have to realize there are people who have these terrible experiences, and that should be taken into account as well, and not just brushed off.
Yes.
And that was, another reason I wanted to do this. One of the questions I would like to ask is, how can we make employees understand that, of course, from an HR perspective, that the company is their employer too, and that is their first line of responsibility. And then yes, it is employees after that, but it doesn't mean that you don't care. Like, how can we make people feel better about that?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that comes top of mind is relationships. I'm very relationship driven. And I think as employees and as the employer side, there has to be a bridge there. We have to connect with each other on a human level. There's some debate out there about whether we should still be called human resources. Does that make sense? But there is a human in human resources for a reason. Our first duty is to the organization. I say that, and I'm like afraid of the backlash that's going to come, but let's call a spade a spade. That's the reality. We are there to protect the organization and their best interests, to mitigate any risk. But within that doesn't mean that we are robots or that we don't have employee interests at heart too, because engagement is the core of an organization. People are the core of an organization. So it's building those relationships. And I think when you set those expectations and then you manage to those, that's how we get there, because so many times I've heard people be like, oh, you're not that kind of HR. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? They say, oh, you're a different kind of HR. And I'm like, I'm just a person. And so get to know your employees. Leaders have your employees' backs, and don't make HR the bad guy. That's how I think we get here a lot of the times, is there's not alignment and support from the top.
Agree. And I talk about that all the time about like it starts at the top and with
Yes.
culture. And I think it's the same way of like how HR is treated is also
Mhm.
how, I feel like CEOs and top executives need to make sure that the culture that they foster isn't doesn't put HR in a spot that makes employees feel that HR is the bad guy, like good cop, bad cop
Right.
type of
Right.
situation. And I'm
Right.
not
It very much becomes that at times,
right.
unfortunately.
It is, and I've been in situations where I was working as a contractor for the government, and it's more like the civilian side, of course, of things because I was military before, and I did feel more like not as safe as when I was in the military. We had like first sergeants, and long story short, that's almost kind of like a segue to HR, and they
Okay.
were very people first, and then squadrons and Air Force almost came second. Like, let's make sure the people are good. And so when a lot of veterans get out of the military, they're like confused as to how HR works because
Yes.
they think that it's going to be like that. And the reality is it's not. And I think that's a big point I wanted to bring out to my veteran friends today is that there is a difference, but it doesn't mean that HR doesn't care and isn't going to, prioritize you. It's just that you have to understand as well that, people have jobs that they have to look out for themselves and their families, and they, can't just put everything on the line for you. They also have a job that they have to secure, an HR person. Whereas in the military, a first sergeant could, put their, life, if you will, on the line for you and not have the repercussions that a civilian HR person would.
That's such an important call out, and thank you so much. And I support our veterans too. I hold a certificate related to that. Thank you for your service, and I really appreciate you sharing that. That's so important because there is a difference, and I have been doing some work to be a part of that solution too. Because sometimes what people get told before that transition happens from the military is different, and let's talk offline too. I might have someone else for you to talk to in that space too.
Awesome. Thank you. But yeah, I
Yeah.
wanted to, open the floor, of course, to you. You have so much knowledge to give us, but to anything really related to this entire subject, this poll.
I think that, I said that setting those expectations and managing those expectations, I think it has to be foundational, because so many times I walk in the room and it's like, oh, here comes the HR, and people literally start scattering. And I'm like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Or people think they're in trouble or they're going to get fired. And I want people to know that there is so much work being put into this. And I'll share that the reason I got into HR is because I was part of that 81% at one point. I got into HR because I didn't have good experiences, and people weren't following up with me. They weren't getting back to me. They weren't being kind or empathetic to situations. And thankfully, I didn't have to go through serious situations, but just on a basic level, I wasn't getting my needs. And so I was like, let's check into this. I feel like I can make a difference, and I've never looked back. I feel like it's my calling. I think that, there's that foundational work, but also just understanding that it's kind of what you make it. And so you have to build those relationships. And there is a whole community of people out there who are working to change the perceptions of HR, who are doing a whole bunch of work. And I know that because I'm part of that work. I was just on a meeting earlier this week and last week, and I will be later this week. So there's so much work that's going into that, because we have some disruptors in HR. We know that we need people to get paid, right? So we need people to do payroll. We need people who can help us understand our compensation and benefits. We need people who can maybe manage through that interpersonal conflict on the day-to-day. And we need our people who are strategic and who can help build organizations. But that being said, that's a whole lot of stuff. So that's
Right.
another thing I want to point out, is that HR people do a whole bunch of things. We're not just there to hire you and fire you. That's not at least that's not how I roll. And I recognize that there are some people who are comfortable in their spaces and they haven't maybe evolved with the profession, but the profession itself has evolved from tactical to transformational. And I am part of that work and I'm so proud. So just, I would urge people, encourage them not to just let those past experiences dictate how the future goes necessarily, because it can be different. And organizations kind of set the tone for that as well.
Absolutely. And I love how you brought up tactical and transformational. You know, that's a leadership theory as well. And I talked about earlier, like a few videos ago, about firefighting. You know, people like to just do firefighting instead of strategic planning. And I feel in relation to this that, you know, HR, what a good HR is compared to a bad one, a bad, you know, not so good one is going to be more tactical, the more hire fire, and that's all we do. All that stuff in between, I don't got time for. Whereas, you know, an amazing HR department will be more, like I said, transformational and care about you, like have those relationships, like, you know, walk by and, you know, have a conversation with you, as opposed to just like that you only see them when you're onboarding or, you know, in trouble or fired. So that's a really great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and talk about visibility. And that's one of the things that's allowed me to, because employees are my stakeholders, just like the organization and the leadership is. So I make it a point to be visible, to pop by a floor and just say, hey, how are you doing? Or I set up coffee dates or lunches with people. I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but I'm saying that to say that these are the things that those of us who really value that and understand and aren't firefighting, that's in our wheelhouse all day, and we enjoy that. So it's just important to call that out, I feel like.
Agreed. And I talk about emotional intelligence a lot because I feel like it can help everybody. I know it helps me, and learning about it daily. But if someone was to, like, an employee was to feel part of that 81% within their company right now, and they wanted to kind of address their qualms with an HR person, how do you feel they could tactfully but effectively get the point across that the trust isn't there and they want it, I guess?
I think you say it just like that. I am a fan of transparency and
Yeah.
just being honest. You don't get what you want by dancing around things and not asking for it. And I've had those conversations. I have had people say to me, whether it's a leader or an employee, I've had it happen multiple times on both sides. Like,
Mhm.
we've had like 4 or 5 HR people. What's going to be different with you? Or how come, you know, I never get what I need from HR anyway, so this is just going to be pointless. And I'm like, ooh, talk about something stinging. But I'm like, let's sink into that a little bit. Hold on, because in my mind, I know, nope, I'm a different kind of HR than what you may be used to. But I think that it's just stating that, like, I've had some trust broken before. I'm just going to put that out there. I want us to kind of start fresh. Here are what my needs are. Help me understand how this works within the organization and how we can maybe come together, because we don't always get our way, and sometimes that's a struggle for employees. Maybe there was some disciplinary issue that they did or didn't recover from, but they still feel some type of way. Maybe somebody didn't get back to them there, and probably any variety in between is why they feel that way. But just get it out there. I had an employee who, she was rough. I mean, she was so rough. I was like, this is not gonna work, but I still have to do my job. And she slammed the door on me once and ran out, and just was not kind to me. We had some rough meetings, but do you know that by the time about 6 to 9 months went by, she would seek me out specifically for advice. And she came to me and said, I don't trust HR. I'm not going to trust you. And I'm just going to tell you what I need, what my needs are that need to get met. And I was like, okay.
Right.
But I appreciated that because it told me where she was, and it allowed me to understand where she was so that I could meet her needs.
That's a really good point. And I love that you love transparency, because me too. So much. So much.
I love you, Brittany.
I did know. That, and like, just like you were saying with that whole scenario, and then like to flip the script, you know, HR people have to use their emotional intelligence to be like, you know, because you obviously have a high level of EQ, and, you know, someone maybe with not so high could get offended immediately. And it's like, you can't get offended when people come to you and be transparent like this. You have to be like, step back, just like you said, and be like, they might have had, bad situations before. That's not me. Let me prove to them now how I can be of service, as opposed to being like, that isn't the, no, 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 and flipping out and like, stop, you know?
But people, HR people sometimes, and I might get scolded by my HR peers for saying this, but we sometimes fall into drama roles, and we will be like, well, I'm the HR person and I'm the person in authority right now. So they may have their people, and I've watched it happen, who have come back at that employee like, hold on, you're not going to talk to me that way. You are, now there's boundaries, right? If you're
for
like
sure. Yeah,
really ridiculous, that's a different thing. But they may have come back and said, well, I'm running this meeting and you're going to sit here and listen to me, and this is how this meeting's going to go. And I've watched that happen. Well, talk about shaking people's faith. That doesn't build trust and empathy. So that can happen too.
for sure. And yeah, like everyone out there, please still use tact and respect when you're talking to HR, because that's not going to bode well for you either. There's both of you need to have some levels of EQ in order for anything to be effective. Because yeah, I've seen people too who just talk crazy to people, and I'm like, how do you think that that's going to be effective? Tell me.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
thank you so much for this conversation. I really think it's going to help on both sides of the spectrum. I'm so happy to have you on. Thank you for, allowing me to, use your mind for all this.
Thanks for requesting my mind. I appreciate you so much. And I love the work that you're doing, and I want to support that. So that's why I'm here, and I appreciate you.